We all have our demons.
Not enough pain.
What's up, everybody? It's Kale Rian, aka Chugmug, aka Saladolin, aka Video Babo XE, aka Video Babo, aka Bobby D. How's it going? Got a new freeform video here today, so I'm going to be a little bit rambly compared to some of the stuff I've been putting out lately, which has been at least bullet pointed. So prepare for rambles. I want to talk a little bit about something I've written about in the past on my WordPress blog, and that is the topic of item scaling in Legion. Some of these points are from a fresh POV compared to when I wrote about it, because we know now that Battle for Azeroth, the next expansion after Legion, is going to have another item level squish. With that in mind, some of the points here about scaling will still kind of hold true, because I think we got a second stat squish a lot faster than we expected. It seemed pretty straightforward that when Blizzard implemented the first squish at the tail end of Mists of Pandaria going into Warlords of Draenor, that everything got squished pretty damn flat, and I don't think I expected, certainly, to see item values go up so much, which they have now done in Legion. We went from having 10,000 health and very minimal DPS at the tail end of Mists after the first squish to having around 400 to 700,000 health at the end of Warlords, to now like 2/3 of the way through Legion, where we have anywhere from 3.8 to 9 million health, depending on if you're a DPS, a healer, or a tank. And that's without last raid tier's gear. When Antorus comes out this week, we're going to have a lot of different shit. It's going to go up in power tremendously. I expect that as a tank, by the time I'm done, even with just normal Antorus, I'm probably going to have close to 10 million health, which is fucking ridiculous. Further, as you might be able to see from the video footage here, I'm just sitting here on Vengeance right now, soloing a heroic dungeon. I'm doing it on heroic just because I wanted to get the world quest done and do some videos without having to think a whole lot about the dungeon itself, but I could do this on Mythic, and have done it in this very dungeon on Mythic as well. Which to me is cool. Like, I like that in some perspective, because it's fun, it's a good challenge, but it's also kind of ridiculous that I can do that at all, especially in the same expansion. In the past, it wouldn't be uncommon for me to be able to do this like at the start of Battle for Azeroth with the gear from the end game there once I hit level 120. But for me to be able to do it at 110 in, second of 3 raid tiers level gear is kind of ridiculous. And that's even considering the fact that they've scaled up the dungeons twice since launch. Like, the heroic version I'm currently doing is actually had 2 different difficulty increases to bring it more in line with our gear as it currently is, and to give a better challenge and also better reward, with higher item level gear being rewarded at base. So it's changed, and the dungeon has increased in difficulty, but yet that difficulty increase has not kept level with the increases in power that we've had as players. So it's pretty absurd. In a likable way for me, but also I can see why that kind of sucks for a lot of people. Like, dungeons are fun gameplay, but if there's no challenge to it, then it starts to feel kind of bad. Now, granted, the challenge of dungeons in Legion's endgame comes from the Mythic Plus system rather than from just doing the normal dungeons ad nauseum in their standard difficulty configuration and gameplay mode. The goal is that you should be doing Mythic Plus, and that Mythic Plus offers the challenge that the normal dungeons doesn't. But is that alone really, the best excuse or reason? I don't think so. I think that there's more in play here. When I looked at this when I wrote about it, the biggest thing I could identify that really seems to have led to this change is the artifact system. Artifact traits scale up your ability to do damage and heal yourself and do all the things that your class or spec can do better at a rate that exceeds just gear bloat on its own. But the other thing is that the silent traits that they've added to them that improve your character stats in other ways have also increased your power bloat pretty substantially. As a tank, for example, my artifact both gives me additional stamina and also increased damage dealt, which is the same for healers. The only specs that don't get additional damage dealt are DPS, who just get the health benefit. So even as my gear improves at a rate higher than it has been at any other point in WoW's history for an expansion, my DPS goes up pretty drastically because of traits and the passive hidden bonuses. My health goes up drastically because these traits that are hidden on the artifact are percentage-based increases to health. They're not flat increases to stamina, it's actually a percentage-based increase, so it improves once when I get the trait, and that trait continues to provide additional benefit as I gear up. Never before in WoW's history has something so substantial been added in as kind of a sort of back-end hidden improvement. With the interview that the WoW dev team had recently with known Discipline Priest, Automatic Jack, one of the things they talked about is that the stamina increase was specifically added for healers. It was actually added to improve healer gameplay by giving them more responsiveness and more ability for them to use lesser heals to mend damage. HOTS actually improve in value if players can take a bigger chunk of damage without needing healing and then can allow the HOT to top them up. So it's an interesting hypothesis because I think that they actually kind of got it right on the healing front, but it is also still a problem in that my health has gone up so much as Vengeance Demon Hunter. Like at the start of the expansion, just hitting 110, I was up to like maybe 3 million, 3.5 million health. And in just over a year, just over 2 tiers of raid content and dungeon content, my health has more than doubled. And by the end of Antorus, it's probably going to have tripled from where I started the expansion at. On top of that, my survivability has gone way up, my damage output has gone way up. Everything about my character has improved on a massive scale that never existed in WoW before. Even in an expansion like Wrath of the Lich King, where they had not pre-planned for heroic difficulty to take off the way it did in raids, and they had massive item level bloat. Like, my stats even during that expansion didn't go up as much as they have during Legion. And I think that's going to be the case for the rest of the expansion, to be honest. Which is precisely why we're getting an item level squish coming in 8.0. And I think that the item level squish is actually a good thing. Like, I enjoy the big numbers of WoW. I won't pretend that that's not the case. But at the same time, it's really hard to read some of these numbers. Like my DPS add-on here that you see popping up above Cordana's head right now is displaying it in truncated form, in Ks and in Ms, rather than in full numbers, because it's too much to read. I don't necessarily care as a player that an ability did 264,569 damage compared to some other number, because it's not relevant and it's not parsable for me in the moment. I don't want to look at a gigantic number and try to parse that in the moment. And as a tank, it's actually kind of weirdly bad in a different way, because when I'm receiving damage, I often don't tend to think about it at all unless it's in millions of damage, unless it's in an easy to read number. If I take under 1 million damage as a tank at this point in Legion, I generally don't care. I'm going to be able to use some sort of self-sustain or other survivability thing to boost through that, so it doesn't matter. Once I take 1 million damage, yeah, you've got my attention, but even then, like 1 million damage in its own right isn't all that impressive either. Yeah, I'll take 1 million damage. I have 8.2 million health. You're gonna have to do that 8 times and change to actually have any chance of taking me down. And that's assuming that I can't then do some sort of mitigation combo through it, that Demon Spikes won't affect that damage, that I can't then use Soul Barrier, that I can't heal through that damage. So, like, seeing the damage I'm receiving doesn't really matter to me unless it's big. I need to take about 1.5 million damage before that's a signal that tells me as a character I have to do something. Which is kind of ridiculous, because it means that there's all of this additional information that's just, like, popping up that I don't necessarily care about. So I'm actually kind of excited for the item level like bloat to go away with Battle for Azeroth, as I was for it actually during the Warlords of Draenor pre-launch as well, because it makes the game more readable, it makes the game more enjoyable when I can see damage numbers that make sense, that are easy to parse and read and understand. Damage in Legion currently isn't parsable, readable, or understandable. It tends to be law of averages. Once I start taking 1,000,000 damage a hit as a tank, it matters. Once I'm doing 200, like 500,000 or more damage as per second, rather, as a DPS, it suddenly matters. Until that point, I don't care. Like, it's useless information. So it's kind of been interesting throughout Legion to see how able I am to solo things that I shouldn't be able to solo current expansion. I've soloed a Mythic +2 on this character, and I almost did a Mythic +4 Upper Karazhan in time if it weren't for Mana Devourer's like insta-gib debuff. I would have actually done it. Which is a cool feeling, like that's a feeling of accomplishment that I have, but it's also kind of shitty. Like, I did my Mythic 4 Mythics quest this week on this character without inviting anyone. I just, as a tank, just did it on my own. I did 4 dungeons solo, and I collected my heroic cash, and I went on about my business. It took a little bit longer than it would have if I got in a group. I could have probably done it in under an hour with a group. I did it in 2 hours and 15 minutes on my own. But I actually kind of had more fun doing it on my own in a weird way. Which, like, I enjoyed, sure, but that sucks for DPS that need to get in and do that quest. That sucks for healers that need to get in and do that. And who often aren't as able to solo things because they don't have the self-sustain and survivability that they would need to do so. So I'm overall in favor of a stat squish, but I'm interested to see how Blizzard handles itemization going forward, because the thing that sticks out like a sore thumb to me is that we kind of expected that another stat squish would happen, and Blizzard has confirmed as much, that they kind of expect it through the life cycle of the game now. They're going to have to do this every few expansions. But what I really am curious to see out of Battle for Azeroth is what the progression model looks like going forward, so that gear can feel rewarding without also blowing our stats up into just stratospheric levels of power. It's fun for me to be able to solo current expansion dungeons by the end of the expansion, but at the same time, maybe I shouldn't be able to do that, and maybe as a reward system that allows me to be able to do that is a bad thing. I don't necessarily know, and I won't pretend that I have any answers to that, because I really don't. But what I can tell you with certainty is that the current system is fucked. It's absolutely 100% fucked. I basically deprived guildmates and any randoms in the group finder tool the ability to make avail of my tank services for the week, for the quest, because it was just faster and well, not faster, but it was easier and more interesting and engaging for me to try and solo all 4 dungeons. And I did it, and I got a decent set of wrist wraps as a reward for that, which I need to socket apparently. That's good to know. And the end result of that is what exactly? A social MMO with gameplay that's supposed to involve groups getting a little lonelier and a little more solo and contained of an experience. I'm a big solo player. I'm a big fan of being able to do things in the game on my own, but it is weird that I can do a dungeon, a current tier dungeon, on my own, and that even after inflating the difficulty of the dungeon twice, I'm just more able to do it with every passing day. And that's with Tumas Argeris gear. In a week, I can get Antorus gear. My item level will start to inflate again. Dungeons will not be getting more powerful to compensate for that. And the end result is that in a couple of months, in the start of 2018, who's to say that I won't be able to solo raids? The only thing that's even keeping me from trying right now is having to try to beg somebody to log on to an alt so that I can make a raid group, zone in, and then have them log off, because current tier raids make you do that still. If I didn't have that barrier, maybe I would have soloed Emerald Nightmare by now. I probably could could in some fashion. There are Havoc Demon Hunters who have done certain bosses in Emerald Nightmare. If I were to do it as Vengeance with good gear, I imagine I could get through the whole of normal pretty straightforwardly. And that's interesting, but also probably not okay. So I think long term for the health of the game, it'll be interesting to see how Blizzard addresses the scale of rewards in Battle for Azeroth. That's one of the things that's a big question mark for us right now. We know that we have Azerite as a gameplay mechanic that reinforces us doing endgame content. We know that we have Titan Forging in some fashion that will still exist in Battle for Azeroth, but probably scaled back. We know that legendaries are gone, so our incentive to grind out content endlessly will be a little reduced. But what we don't know is how item levels will work, what our scale of rewards from dungeons and raids will be, how many tiers of raiding there will be. Will there be any difficulty scaling? Will dungeons continue to increase in difficulty and reward level as the expansion goes on and new content comes out? All of these are interesting questions that I'm curious to see, but what I worry about is that it's going to be status quo. We're going to get the same that we got in Legion. And I liked the systems in Legion, but there is the question of how much power bloat is too much for Blizzard, because we see varying answers for that in the community. I feel conflicted about my own response to that question because I enjoy soloing, but question if I should be able to do it this way. Because I'm not a high skill player. I'm not a mythic level raider. I'm at best a mid-tier heroic level tank who does well enough to continue to be one of the main tanks in a guild that I'm an officer in. I haven't had to try my chances at recruiting. I haven't had to try my chances at skilling up. Could I maybe rise to that challenge? Perhaps. I'd like to think so. I mean, I hope. But I'm not a high skill level player. I'm not, the Miones of the world who can solo things with the greatest of ease. But yet, here I am. I did a Mythic +2 this week, completely solo. I did 4 Mythic Dungeons on my own. I just on video soloed a heroic dungeon, including a world quest, and did so pretty easily with no threats to my life. So I wonder how Blizzard feels about this, because while we've seen them talk about item squish and about the ideals and values around that, I almost knocked over my mic. We haven't really heard them say if they feel like the current level of gear inflation is okay, if that they like that people can solo and do content in this way. And while a part of me thinks that they might be okay with it, there's a bigger part of my brain that says probably not. But we may never hear them actually say that out loud, because doing so might be admitting that their reward structure is perhaps a little bit broken. And broken things can be okay. Maybe there's nothing wrong with it being broken, but it being broken points out to us that our sense of what is rewarding in World of Warcraft and what actually gives us value for our gameplay can't always be gear. For my part, just to kind of throw it out there randomly, I like cosmetic rewards, and I hope that with the removal of tier sets in Battle for Azeroth, maybe we'll see more options for cosmetic gear looks. Now, I'm not saying that Mythic Raiders should only get a cosmetic appearance for armor and that anything else would be, broken rewards, but I think that there's an interesting discussion to be had about how much power we should be gaining from upgrades, and particularly when it comes to raiding, how much power should we get from a jump in difficulty? Like currently right now at 15 item levels, it feels like too much. I mean, Titan Forging makes that a little less the case, but like for example, my tier cape right now is mythic item level and I got it from normal. Now, we know that Titan Forging is supposed to be getting changed a little bit in terms of the chance of things to Titan Forge, so that should happen less in Battle for Azeroth. But the fact that it can even happen at all is kind of weird. The fact that through random chance my gear can get exponentially more powerful is kind of strange. It is kind of cool. As I've written in the past a lot, I like Titan Forging in one way, which is that there is a sense of reward from a lot of stuff, and there is this cool sort of surprise moment that you get from something Titan Forging to a high level. But I very much wonder what we give up to get that sense of surprise and excitement, and if what we're giving up in terms of the reward system overall is worth that trade-off. But that's just food for thought, and I'm going to end the video there. So if you liked what you watched here, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm putting out YouTube videos 7 days a week, and I'm also streaming 6 days a week over at twitch.tv/KaleRien. Lastly, as I've been referencing throughout this video, I do have a lot of blog posts up at kalerien.wordpress.com. If you're interested in my take on this topic or many more, feel free to stop by and take a read and leave me a comment over there. So that'll be it for me here today, and I will see you next time.
Thank you.